Hello everyone, welcome back to June 14th Call of Duty DFS Slate Breakdown. We have a pretty interesting 4-gamer here today. Quick first glance of the odds. Three pretty closely, you know, tightly knit games here, and then Atlanta FaZe is a pretty decent favorite over LA Thieves, but overall I think some pretty interesting stuff to go ahead and talk about and look into today. So first series up is the European battle. Well, kind of. I mean, I know Toronto is in Europe, but all the players are European, so it's kind of the European battle between the London Royal Ravens with the full British team, and then Toronto with like two British players, an Irish player, and a Scottish player or something. So like a whole UK derby here. But either way, London minus 130, Toronto even money here. Pretty intriguing. I do think this one is fairly priced. You know what? Actually, that I think that's actually a little false. I actually am pretty surprised that London is being still a little disrespected, in my opinion. Um, I will obviously recognize their big problems in control. That is insanely apparent if you look down here for their like map and mode records. They are 9-1 in hardpoint. They are 5-1 in search and destroy, and they are 0-5 in control. They did not win a control the entire stage for qualifiers. Toronto, on the other hand, that is their strongest game mode. They were 3-6 in hardpoint, pretty bad. 3-5 in search and destroy, pretty bad, and then 3-2 in hardpoint, which is a positive record. So, a very winnable game mode there. Overall, I think Toronto's going to be a pretty sizable favorite in Map 3 control, I'd have to imagine. Yeah, they are. London's a big favorite in the hard points, but the search and destroys are close. Controls heavily in favor of Toronto, so yeah, that definitely is what I'm looking at as well. Overall, I do lean towards London. I do like continuing to ride this train. Granted they did have a pretty bad series last time out versus LAG. I believe that was the last qualifier match, so we didn't end up doing like a recap on that. But that was a pretty bad performance from them. I believe they were up 2-1, and then like the series stopped forever, and it was just a weird thing, and then they came back and lost. It is what it is, but at the end of the day, I still think overall they had a very strong qualifiers. Beating four pretty solid teams. I don't think Florida's still that great. Toronto's kind of but for that first match between Toronto and London, Toronto is a pretty sizable favorite. Obviously, we got that one right and picked the London upset, and it worked pretty well. I just have not seen much from London to take me away from this one. The big problem is, of course, that the fact that Toronto's best game mode is control, and London, statistically speaking, and London's worst game mode is control, statistically speaking, and anything speaking. Obviously, they are 14-2 in the other game modes, and then 0-5 in control. So the boon is clearly there. That's definitely going to be the problem. Fortunately for them, that's only one out of the 5 games they play is that control. Obviously, they have 2 hard points and 2 search and destroys in a series. Just the one control. That does hinder their DFS upside, having one of those respawn game modes be very, very bad for them. So that's a thing as well. Overall, I'm still not too concerned. I definitely like going to the London side. They're actually fairly priced, specifically Afro at 7, Zero at 7.2. Maybe you could make an argument for Nasty at 8.6. I think Gizmo at 10 is pretty overpriced. Over on the Toronto side, Insight 8.2 is pretty underpriced. You could definitely make an argument to go there. Kleenex at 7.6. We know his volatility. It has been better. The thing here with Toronto is they've actually played a pretty solid last couple of matches. Specifically their submachine gun players. So if we look at their statistics from over the last few matches, I'm sorry about that. I guess we'll look at all 5. We'll bring it up. So, if we were to start out from the beginning of the year, right? They play Yeah, LAG first. So as we could see, this was a good performance from Insight. Kleenex just got completely decimated. Bance did okay in this series. I think that's an acceptable scoreline from Bance. But really was Insight doing well, Kleenex doing really poorly. The next series, Bance and Kleenex, very, very bad. There's some machine gun players are getting just completely smoked and demolished in pretty much every asset in this one. And I feel like that trend continued. If we look here, Bance minus 19, Kleenex minus 11. Insight and Cammy didn't do particularly great either. But again, minus 19, minus 11. However, I think the tides turned a little bit here. As we could see, this was actually a very strong performance from them. Insight plus 27. This was, I think, very strong Gavutu. I think he did control. Yeah, great here as well. This is the kind of caveat here, I think, with Toronto is, look here, Bance plus 8, Kleenex plus 8. And then in this one, I believe, against Optic, they had a plus 12 from Bance and a plus 3 from Kleenex. So there's some machine gun players who are actually picking it up. They got the reverse sweep here against Optic. Insight got completely smoked in this game one against Optic. He ended up having a little bit of a better series. However, that game one just completely demolished him. But you like to see Bance getting on the board and doing well here as well. So that's kind of the X factor here. Is I don't know how much stock I want to put into this overall. But that definitely does kind of concern me, because it's not quite an anomaly if it happens like 2 times back to back like that. Like, I know it kind of can, happen back to back, whatever. But on one hand, you could argue that that's a, like, what am I trying to say here? You could argue that you could look at this trend and try to hop on board with Toronto. I think I will be, but I think that's going to be a spot where I'm going to look to try to pounce on them in their lower bracket match. So if we go to the Major 4 championships here, obviously we have London, Toronto up here. The next matchup for the loser would be against LAG. I think I like Toronto in that spot, assuming that their submachine guns continue to perform. However, I think the kind of caveat is you could argue that Toronto have a pretty good shot of winning the series if their submachine guns perform. We know the upside Insight has. He's been one of the best players of the entire Major 4 qualifiers. Bance and Kleenex, obviously, we just pointed out how bad they were those first few matches, and then the last couple that they played were much, much stronger from their submachine gun duo. That could definitely make a pretty big impact for them overall, and that's definitely a spot you could look at. The problem, the slight kind of asterisk, I think, on the point that I just made of their submachine guns playing better is that it was back-to-back days. So if you guys are a fan of this channel for a while or follow me in my rhetoric, I guess you could say, I'm pretty heavy on the how your day-to-day kind of stuff affects you. And the first week they got smoked. The second week they were a little bit better. It was just the one game against FaZe, not a big deal. And then their last week, their last couple of days, just 4 days ago, on Saturday the 9th and then Sunday the 10th is when they played those last couple of matches where they played very well. I'm talking about Bance and Kleenex specifically here. Obviously, Insight had one bad series. Cammy had one bad series, and that kind of somewhat negated what we're looking at here. It's just really hard for me to gather whether that was just kind of a blip on the radar, and Toronto is actually kind of coming together a little bit here, and their submachine gun players have maybe kind of figured something out and improved. You could definitely make a pretty good case here. I think when we look at the Toronto side specifically, there's a pretty solid case that the Toronto side has a lot of value. I think if you were to take the Toronto versus London series and just eliminate these top 3 players of Gizmo, Cammy, and Nasty, and just leave in your player pool Insight, Kleenex, Zero, Afro, and Bance as solid values, I think that would make a lot of sense. Again, I do think Bance his kill death ratio doesn't need to be that stellar. When we remember the context of DFS and what we're aiming for, we don't necessarily need our teams to win. Like here in this series, Boston beat Toronto. However, Insight, Bance, and Kleenex all put up incredible DraftKings numbers here. So in the context of that, we need to remember that kills, it's a pretty basic formula. Kills are worth 2 points, deaths are negative 1 point. We want more kills than deaths. However, if we have a lot of kills, then it can negate some of the deaths as well. So if we look at these 100 kill games that are coming out from Kleenex and Bance, that's 200 DraftKings points, as a base. Granted, they have 90 and 100 deaths, so that's negative 100. But again, for the most part, what you're looking for and what you're aiming and hoping for, especially from somebody as cheap as Kleenex at 7.6 and especially Bance at 6.2, if you could get 100 points from them, you would be more than happy, because it means you can unlock pretty much anything else you want on the slate. You have a lot of salary to play with, and you'd be more than pleased to have a 100-point performance from somebody like 6,200. And I think that's a very fair and very good way to look at this slate. The other thing I want to touch on in this one is Bocage. Obviously, I bring it up every series because it does matter that much. And London banned Bocage. They just get rid of it. That's their perma ban. Toronto's ban on the flip side will go ahead and be Gavutu. So that leaves us with a pretty decent map pool. I'm fine with locking and loading some Berlin and Tuscan for both of these teams. The problem is that map set feels really, really good for London. They're 5-0 on Tuscan, 3-1 on Berlin. That's probably their two best maps. So it feels like Toronto do get a short end of the stick, kind of, I guess, by their own doing in their map pool, because London have a very good Gavutu. They don't get tested on it that much. As you can tell, they played it once, and I think they beat FaZe on it, maybe. I don't remember who. They won the Gavutu hardpoint though, and they look pretty good. I definitely think that's one of their good maps as well. So. And the fact that Toronto are just really, really bad on Gavutu also signals some problems overall. So I think you get two very strong maps for London, for Berlin and Tuscan. You get Toronto, who 1-1 on Berlin, 2-1 on Tuscan. I mean, that's two of their better maps. So you could definitely make a case there that these are actually decent maps for both sides. However, it's just really hard to overlook the numbers there for London. This is just last 5 series, their last set of qualifiers. 3-1 on Berlin, 5-0 on Tuscan, and I think that's the expected map pool. Again, pretty solid from Toronto. I don't think 1-1 and 2-1 is bad, but compare that to an 8-1 record, and you have a 3-2 record. It just seems very one-sided. Again, the caveat or the problem here lies with the control. London gets smoked on the controls. Afro is the only positive kill death ratio player in the control. Control's a very strong game mode for Toronto. I think actually they turned it around themselves. We see Insight and Cammy both have very strong control numbers. They're in their own right, so that could negate some of the London upside. I do think London probably win this in 4. I do think this is going to be one of the more predictable score lines. I do think I want to look at something here, but I do think London have won 4 out of their series 3-1, and I think that's a pretty fair expectation here as well. I think they win the 2 hard points in the search and destroy, lose the control to Toronto. I will add one small caveat after I talk about this. I guess it's not an option here. That kind of sucks. I was hoping they had an exact score guesser, because if you have a book, maybe not on here, maybe not like Bovada, but if you have a book option and you could look for a London to win 3-1 exactly and try to get a pretty nice number on that, like 600 or so, I don't know. I would take a look at that. But the small caveat here I'll add is, if London start the series up 2-0, I think you could definitely look at betting a Toronto reverse sweep. just because I think Toronto probably win this control a good bit of the time, and then I think Toronto is pretty competitive in the search and destroy. Although the numbers maybe not suggested, I do think of Toronto as a pretty solid S&D team. So what you're really asking for is you're probably going to be getting like I don't even know. You could probably get like a plus 6, 7, 800 maybe, like something pretty crazy on Toronto to win the series after they're down 0-2. And I think that'd be worth a small sprinkle on. Again, it's very unlikely if that were to be the case. But, maybe Toronto steal the search and destroy, then the map count is 1-1, and then you're not even making a bet in that scenario. So it's just a small sprinkle. It's something to keep an eye out for. Look through the series, wait for maybe if London go up 2-0, try to get a really strong number on Toronto to get the reverse sweep. And I think it's worth a glance because, again, I do think the search and destroys are pretty close, probably slightly lean towards London. The hard point is going to be pretty decently favored towards London. But I think, if Toronto win the control, after the control, you're going to be looking at a much different price tag, and I do think they win that control a good bit of the time. So keep an eye out for that. We'll talk about players towards the end, but I kind of alluded to who I liked a little bit earlier from that zone. Boston, Florida. So give me 1 second while I take a sip of my water and rejuvenate my voice a little bit here. So Boston's been a pretty interesting team here so far. So is Florida. I think these are two pretty interesting things to look at. So on the Boston side, I doubted them pretty heavily early on. I felt like getting rid of Capsule was a pretty big mistake. I thought he was their best player, and it seemed like a pretty big downgrade for them. However, they've obviously proven me wrong. They came out and beat Optic Texas. That was a pretty crazy thing at the time. Obviously, in hindsight, it seems a little bit different now. Then they got swept by LA Thieves. Pretty disappointing one. And then they get a win over Seattle, LAG, and Toronto. So overall, if we were to look at the results here from Boston, it's pretty interesting. Sorry, nose and throat still going crazy here. But I feel like their record is a tad bit inflated, and I'm not sure what to make of either of these teams, to be perfectly honest. So, on the Boston side, they beat Toronto, who's 2-3, not a very good number for them. They beat Seattle, who's 1-4, LAG, who's 2-3, Optic, who's 1-4. So they beat 3 of the bottom 4 teams. They beat 4 of the bottom 5 teams. Their wins are all 8, 9, 10, 11 ranked. So they beat Toronto, LAG, Optic, and Seattle. I just wanted to double check and make sure I'm not crazy saying that. So every team they beat has a losing record. Granted, are Toronto, Optic, and Seattle probably a little bit better than their record? Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's a fair point. But you can't ignore that. Their 4 wins are against 4 of the bottom 5 record teams. So where are they? If we were to look at Florida, their wins are against Paris, 3-2. Not even a dominant win. That was a dicey win over Paris. Don't need much explanation on that one. They beat LA Thieves and Minnesota. 2 better wins. I'll give them that. Those are definitely better wins than what Boston has. I think Minnesota and LA Thieves are obviously their records are better. I think they played better. It is what it is. Their losses are to London and New York. Those are pretty respectable games to lose. London and New York were probably the 2 best teams of the Major 4 qualifiers. We know how New York has looked online, pretty impressive. We know how London has looked online, just in general with their full roster. They've been pretty good as well. So overall, I do think the outlook of Florida is a little bit better than Boston. The big caveat here is the map selection. Off the bat, obviously, I do kind of slightly have a lean towards Florida, but the map set does change that a little bit for me. So over on the Boston side, it's pretty up in the air what they ban. Obviously, it says here that their most banned map is Bocage, but obviously we know that's the map they want to get to the most right now. So they either ban Gavutu or Tuscan. It looks like Tuscan's probably the one that they remove the most as of late because they've yet to play it in their last 5 matches. And that all these matches have had more than 3 games. So this is 2 hard points total, like 2 hard points per series, except for the LA Thieves one. So I'd imagine Tuscan is the one that they're banning the most. That removes removes a really, really good map that Florida has had. Obviously, they're 4 and 5 in hardpoint, but 3 of those 4 wins are on Tuscan. So I think right off the bat that hurts them a good bit. Now, what does Florida ban in return? I'm not sure. That's again another problem. I think they could either ban the Berlin or the Gavutu, but I think I find it very hard that Florida would try to look to ban the Bocage. That's obviously something they've only banned twice in their of the season so far. So it's close between Berlin and Gavutu. That makes a big difference because as much as I want to praise Gavutu and talk up, praise Bocage and talk up Bocage and how much that helps fantasy goodness, a lot of that potential has been wiped out by a bad Gavutu as well. I think Bocage is, this may be a little bit confusing, but hopefully you guys can get what I'm saying. But in terms of the level of which Bocage is good does not get wiped out by how bad Gavutu is. So for as a hypothetical, scenario to kind of make this, I guess, a bit more visual thing, like if the standard fantasy points per map was 25, again, completely hypothetical just for argument's sake, and Bocage's fantasy points per map was 30, and I think Gavutu's would probably be under 25, so it's going to be a net negative in terms of average. However, I think it's probably only like a 22 to 23, so you're probably losing a few points on Gavutu, but you're gaining more from a good Bocage. So I do like the Bocage in this series. Obviously, I like Boston in that because they're 3-0 on it. They've looked very strong in that with their submachine gun duo of Nero and Vivid. I think TJ Halley's been pretty strong on the Bocage as well. The problem, the other map is the key here. I don't think either of those are good for Florida, and I don't love Boston on Gavutu. That's the big difference maker. I will be firing up some Boston because they have the Bocage and they've been looking really good on it as well. And I just want that Boston upside from that Bocage, and I hope they put the rest around it together. Their control is obviously very strong as well, 4-1. Their Search and Destroy is bad, but we don't play DraftKings players for Search and Destroy wins. We play them for their hardpoint and control prowess, and I think that's going to be very, very strong here for Boston. Again, the question will be, does Florida ban Gavutu or Berlin? Because if they ban Gavutu and we get a Berlin Bocage, we are so chilling. We love our Boston stacks in that scenario. Even if Boston don't do well, if they play Berlin and Bocage and they lose, it is what it is. But if they play Berlin Bocage and they do well, we could be laughing. Taking our money to the bank. So I'm firing up a good bit of Boston. On the downside, they're not the easiest to get in. TJ Halley at 6'8", Vivid at 7'8", Methods at 8'4", Nero at 10'4". Those are some pretty tough price tags. Those are some tough price tags to swallow. Obviously, Too Real is not in the player pool. However, I don't think you probably ever want to use him regardless. He was statistically the worst player of all of the qualifiers. I just have a hard time kind of guessing where Florida will ban. I think it would make sense that they probably go ahead and ban the Berlin. I mean, they've banned Berlin 8 times. However, they've yet to play the Gavutu themselves either. So maybe that's something they're looking to try to get out of their player pool or out of their map pool. So I'd have to imagine we probably should get a Bocage Berlin. And I think for that scenario, I'm really liking the Boston side. We'll look up the Yeah, lost full player map stats. This is something I'd never bring up for some reason. I'll go ahead and bookmark it here. Select map Bocage. We're looking at the last three because obviously we remember Boston are now 3-0 on Bocage. It's a new team on Bocage now with their new submachine gun pairing of Nero and Vivid. So I'm looking at their last three specifically. We'll look at Nero first. Insane, incredible numbers. 49 and 33 here, 39 and 30 here. These are 49 and 33. That's 100 minus 33. That's a 66 point DraftKings map here. That is insane. That is a 60 point DraftKings map here. That's an incredible number. 32 and 38, pretty bad, but I mean we know Seattle. We know how good they are. They can be, especially on Bocage. That's still a very strong DraftKings map. Not the best. 32 times 2, that'd be 64 minus 38. That would be 28, maybe? No? I don't know. Whatever. 26 maybe? I'm not sure. Something like that. So not a great DraftKings map there. But then against LAG, he's back at it again, 39 and 30. That would be 78 minus 30, 48 DraftKings point map there. That's an insane number. Vivid. Again, one great performance against Seattle here. Two pretty bad ones against Optic and LAG. But the upside is here. We know how much of a good player on overall on Bocage that he is. 35 and 34. If we were to look at the whole map stats for Nero, 35 and 37, but again, I think he's been playing much better lately. The other one to look at, I think, is TJ Halley. He's been playing Bocage at a pretty neutral level, 33 and 31 twice, and then a 30 and 34. But again, that's a 30-point DraftKings map for somebody who is 6,800. I'd be fine with that. I'd take that every day of the week as a third man in or as a super cheap value. If they end up playing well and playing the rest of the series well, I definitely would take that. The rest of his KD is not good. He's had very bad other hardpoint maps, but if you're looking at like a 1.02 here, and then you have a 1.05 in the controls, at 6,800, he could put up 100 easily, and I think that's a very strong value as well. So those are the three I would like for Boston for sure. We'll take a look at methods, but he has not been a good Bocage player. Yeah, 31's like a max kills 34 or of 31. It's just not his map. He's a slow AR player. Bocage is a fast submachine gun player. Just doesn't match up. Just don't want any methods here. And I don't think you want to play Bocage, or I don't think you want to play Boston because you want Bocage upside, and that would just not fit with the rest of your lineup here. So here comes New York versus Minnesota. I'm going to try to go through these ones a little bit quicker. My nose and voice are just getting too beat up here. So it is worth mentioning that New York did have a small COVID scare on the 9th. So a day before they played LA Thieves. Hydra tested positive for COVID, and I mean, he ended up playing, and they didn't look that great. I think it just did throw a wrench into things. It does look like Hydra will be playing. I believe I don't know what the scenario is. I don't know if he's either negative now or if he's able to like play from like some type of quarantine. I'm not sure. But I believe he will be there playing. So expect the full thing here for New York and Minnesota. It's a pretty interesting one because, again, New York, as we know, this is something we've talked about many times. They've played pretty decent on their qualifiers, Major 3 qualifiers. They were pretty solid. Ended up losing it to both matches and not winning a single match on LAN. Same for the Major 2 tournament, Major 1 tournament as well. They have not won a match on LAN yet this year. So it is slightly tough there. Is that going to scare me off of them? I'm not sure. Probably not. The reason is, if we look over on the Minnesota side, they were a team I liked going. I liked early on. However, if we look at again, similar to how we looked at similar to how we looked at Boston, Minnesota's wins are not as impressive in hindsight. They have wins over Paris, Texas, and Seattle. Although I think Texas and Seattle were underdog picks I had of Minnesota over these two teams. So big wins for us. We have the luxury of hindsight now, and those are not impressive wins, especially being close series in a couple of these. We obviously Paris, Seattle, Optic, the worst three teams in the league this season, I should add. Just not impressive, and I think this is going to be the time New York step it up and do well. I like New York a good bit. They are a decently sized favorite, but they're a team I'm willing to lock and load. We're on three favorites here. But again, I think there's ways to get unique and different ways to approach this stuff. Map set. I think Bocage is pretty likely. Minnesota either banned Gavutu or Tuscan, and I believe New York banned Tuscan. So New York probably banned Tuscan. Minnesota probably banned Gavutu. We get a Berlin and Bocage. Both very strong maps for New York. I wouldn't be surprised if New York just dominate this series in the respawn game modes. They maybe drop a search and destroy or something, but Minnesota's been weak in the controls. Although they are 3-0 on Bocage, that does add a twist to this that makes it a little interesting. I just think New York have been actually a very good Bocage team since they had this new roster form. I think they're very good on Berlin. This map set I think is very dominant for the New York side. Because Minnesota play the same maps, they just play them worse. There's not much else way to put it. So, like I just said, I do believe Minnesota typically ban the Gavutu. New York either ban Gavutu or Tuscan, and they'll probably end up banning the Tuscan if I were to guess. So Bocage chances I think are pretty high. I will add the small caveat of maybe New York want to ban the Bocage. It's not something they've done a ton of. Obviously, they've only banned Bocage twice. And I do think it's a map that they are comfortable on. It's just one of those things where Minnesota's they've not played Gavutu. They're 0-2 Tuscan. They're 2-2 Berlin. So they've not showed strength on any of these other maps. And they're 3-0 on Bocage. So it would make sense if New York want to just say, screw it. We'll take Minnesota's best map out away from them and see if they have anything else. So that is the caveat. I do think that the chance of that happening is, relatively decent. But I think Bocage chances are probably like 60% yeah, 40% New York ban it. But the map potential I think is pretty strong here because I think Minnesota go ahead and ban Gavutu a good bit of the time. I do think if it goes down to a Berlin Tuscan, like if New York go ahead and ban Bocage and we go to a Berlin Tuscan, obviously I favor that New York a good bit there on those as well. I'm not too scared of that happening either. I think those are still pretty neutral to positive maps for DraftKings scoring. So locking and loading New York for sure. In that one, don't want to spend too much time there. LA Thieves Atlanta. So this one's pretty interesting to me. I'm honestly at first glance a little surprised that the odds are this one-sided. You guys have known my hesitancy on both of these teams, frankly. This far, it's been a pretty rocky road, I think, both ways for these teams. So obviously we have Atlanta FaZe, who are the odds-on favorites to go ahead and win this tournament. As they've been in the finals of every major so far, every championship so far. They've been in the finals of them. They lost to Seattle last time out. Major 2, they lost to LAG in the final. Major 1, they lost to Texas in the final. They are the second place guys. They've gotten second every time so far. 2-5, 2-5, 2-5, and 3-5. So it's definitely hard to argue with their ability. However, I feel like they've been stronger going in every time. They were Major 2 qualifiers, 3-2, not the best. Major 1 qualifiers, 5-0. Major 3 qualifiers, 3-2, again, not the best. Major 4 qualifiers, again, 3-2, pretty similar stuff. you could definitely make a pretty good case to just continue to ride phase here. Again, their players are incredible. Celium is the number one statistic player, I think, in the game. And non-statistic, he's just the number one player in the game. There's no arguing that, I don't think. I think the problem that I have here is I just think they're a little bit overrated. These odds are a little crazy. I definitely think FaZe probably win this a good bit of the time. You could definitely make a very strong case to just lock and load Celium into all your lineups. He's been that good. I don't think that's a bad strategy. However, LA Thieves map set, they banned Bocage, which actually I don't think is that great for them. FaZe are not the best Bocage team anymore, but they're still willing to play it. And that's just what Thieves ban. So LA Thieves go ahead and ban Bocage. And then we know FaZe typically go ahead and reserve the Berlin ban themselves. So I do believe we will be going ahead and getting a Gavutu Tuscan, which I do think is a pretty bad map set overall for DraftKings scoring. In terms of that map set, I would probably favor FaZe. I do think they are still the better team. Their best player is Celium. So they're a strong Tuscan team, and then their best player is a strong AR for Gavutu, which is an AR heavy map. I do think on the flip side, we do have Octane, who's been playing at a very strong level. And then we also have the Control, which LA Thieves have been playing pretty well. So I think overall, when we look at the map win rate for FaZe, like they beat Seattle. This Thief series was a 3-2, by the way. So, so if we were to look at FaZe and say they just won a 3-2 over this team, like it was a close series, and one of these is a gigantic favorite. I mean, these numbers are not good for these teams. This series pretty much exactly went how I would have envisioned it in my head. Obviously, I think LA Thieves probably win more than 0 search and destroy rounds this time, but I think this perfectly encapsulates exactly how I would view how the series goes. The same maps. I think LA Thieves are probably going to win the Gavutu again. I would have to imagine the Control will be close, but maybe slight edge towards LA. Hardpoint Tuscan probably favor the FaZe as well. Probably favor FaZe in the search and destroys, but we're not playing these players for their search and destroy wins. We're playing them for their respawn game mode wins. So for this one, I'm willing to leave it more open for both sides as well. A little bit similar to how I had the first series, although I do like London a little bit more in this facet. I'm willing to leave this one open and go with either side players. I think this is more of a target some good players type of deal rather than try to get stacks or who to win. Map set I think is pretty bad. I think if they go to the Gavutu Tuscan, I think that's one of the worst map sets on the slate. So that already a kind of red flag for not loving this series. I think it's closer than what it's supposed, closer than how it looks. Although the scoreline we just looked at was pretty grim for the Thieves, player wise, I think they're gonna perform a little bit better, hopefully. So I'm willing to leave this one open and look at the players more so than anything else. When it comes down to it, it's going to be the same LA Thieves, boys. It's been every time for us. We've rid Octane and Draza pretty much to the ground. They've done us pretty well, but those would be the two. I like Octane, I like Draza, I like Celium, and that's probably it. You could definitely make a case for Simp. He's had some good performances here and there as well. They're just a little bit more few and far between, and I just like the Thieves in this series to make it a little bit closer than the odds suggest. And that'll be my vote for it. I think Draza at 6K is one of those very strong cheapies. So that's like the third under 7K player I've liked so far. Draza, maybe Bance again, a little bit more of a flyer, but definitely possible. TJ Halley at 6'8". So it's the third under 7K player that I've not minded putting in my lineups. And I think that creates a pretty decent build. I think people are going to be relatively balanced and try to look at more so of the people like Paulex, maybe there's going to be a lot of Celium, maybe some Insight. I don't know, Attach at 8K is pretty mispriced. He's pretty cheap. So there's a lot of decent mid-tier guys you could go to. I think that opens up a little bit more of a unique style of build, and try to get up to somebody like Nero at 10-4 and then go down to Draza at 6. That's probably going to be a much lesser looked at combo than something like Celium and Zero or Afro. I think Afro and Zero, or Afro and Celium, is going to be a super popular combo, like that kind of stuff. I don't think those plays are objectively bad. I just think that you can create a different avenue for yourself and try to get a little bit different that way. And I think that's going to be it for me. We'll go ahead and look at the players' stats and get out of here. So, again, map set. I don't love that they're playing the Tuscan. The fact that they pigeonholed themselves into playing 3 maps and they're not even good at like 2 of them is definitely problematic. But I think Gavutu Tuscan, it'll be a close series. And I think the fact that we're getting a plus 370 or minus 375 plus 260 on what I think is a close series is a little crazy to me. So yeah, like I said, we'll go ahead and look at the player stats. One thing to remember, again, I'll touch on, is some players do definitely perform different online versus LAN. So quick example, we'll look at only online stats here. Major 2, 3, and 4 qualifiers. We'll just leave it to the last couple, or last few. If we were to look at somebody like Optic Texas, I know, for example, Shotzi's numbers are going to be different. It's Toronto. So on LAN, Shotzi's at a 1.06. Not the greatest. Or sorry, online, he's at a 1.06. So that's not even that great either. But if we were to look on LAN, that number drops to a 1.05. Okay, that's not as dramatic as I thought it would be. I think it's the last 2 he's been even more pronounced. Okay, no, man, that was a bad example, but whatever. I mean, the easiest example I can make is a Mac from Seattle. So Major 3 and Major 4 qualifiers. This is online matches. 0.0 or 0.91. He's been pretty bad online. If we're to look at the LAN stats, he's a beast. He's their best player on LAN. So he goes from their worst player to their best player on LAN. So that's something to keep in mind here. Is that's something worth looking into. I would try and mix and match some of these stats that you're going to look at. Because we have to remember that the game is a little bit different when you are in person with the zero connection bothering you. There's the LAN environment, being on stage, all that stuff matters. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you guys want to take your time, look at this yourself. Just breakingpoint.gg player stats. You guys can do the same thing I am doing here. But look at some of these teams and see if there's anything that stands out. So we'll look at like LA Thieves, for example. Octane's at a 0.99, Envoy 0.93. We'll look at probably just the past couple onlines. So Octane 1.1, Draza 1.04. Those are pretty decent. Now for the last couple LANs, they've both been pretty bad, but they're still decent. The main thing what you're looking for is differences. Like if they're much better or much worse on LAN than they are online, then keep an eye out for that. But overall, we'll just take a look at Major 4 qualifiers because that's the last series that they've played. LA Thieves, we'll throw FaZe in here just to look at that side as well. New York, again, we talked about Boston and their circumstances, but we'll put them on here as well. So we'll look at these 5 teams. And again, I think that's a pretty clear and fair picture of the players that I'm looking to target. Again, or I didn't mention this earlier, but Hydra is currently not in the player pool. Clayster should not be. I'd imagine when Hydra gets added, he'll probably be in the 9K range. I can't imagine he would be less less than Paul. So if that is the case, it's very tough to stack up New York. I definitely think Minnesota is underpriced with how well Attach and Havoc have been playing. uh, individually. However, again, I still just like the New York side, and I like trying to spend some of the salary I save on there. So keep an eye out for that. But I mean, Paul's been one of the best players. He's at 8.8. Hydra is there. We don't have a price tag on him. I mean, Zero, we talked about Celium and Octane from that last series. Celium's numbers are off the charts. You could definitely justify him. Octane at 8K, you could justify. Um, Simp 1.09. He's super expensive, but maybe that means people won't get him in. I don't know. Gizmo 10K, can't get there. Afro 1.03. I mean, he's at 7K. You could justify that. So, we've talked about all the players again. You know, we talked about the scenarios and circumstances already. I feel like we don't need to kind of go over them. So, I like Zero, Afro, Insight, Bance. You could make an argument for all of them. Kleenex even. Arguments are there for all of them. I like Boston side. Again, we talked about the map set. I think Vivid, Nero, TJ Halley, pretty good, for what they do. I would like Hydra Paul here. Hopefully Hydra gets added, but if not, then it's just a Paul or pass for me here. And then for this one, I like Celium, I like Octane, I like Draza for what they do at their price tags. I like Celium to just continue to be great. Draza for salary, and Octane is maybe a little bit more of a pivot thing. So that'll be it for me today. My voice is going out, so that will be it for me tonight. I will see you guys all again tomorrow for more League of Legends and Call of Duty action. So stick around, and best luck to you guys tonight. I'll see you then.